Hi, Stephen. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sherry. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to have a fellow Canadian on the show today. I think you're calling in from Ottawa, Canada.
That is correct.
That is correct. You don't seem so enthusiastic about Ottawa.
Well, it's a little rainy here today, and to be honest, I guess I've been sort of focusing on potentially transitioning down into Florida at some point.
Yeah.
But no, I like Ottawa. It is a good city. It has developed in the, food aspects and whatnot, so it's improved over the years.
Yeah, I can't say Montreal is that far ahead, I have to say, because I think we're everything is similar. We have the similar weather, we have the similar mindset, and then we saw also just in the last couple of years, you guys, Ottawa, you were the leaders, I would say, during the pandemic and sort of things taking a nice turn for us. So it's great. Yeah, great to have you here. So, what's super interesting also about you is that you've worked with canines, so in fact, elite level canine training for 2 decades. You've focused on obedience, aggression, control, behavioral modification, and protection training. And you've turned potential killer dogs into loyal family members. I think you have to work first of all with my dog Shadow because I'm seeing a little bit of that tendency with him, by the way. But now you're actually taking all of this experience and working with people and helping them really harness mindset and really focus on lifestyle. And so I'm so curious how you transitioned from training and coaching canines to really starting to work with humans and how that is similar in some ways.
So, I mean, the bottom line is that I got into dog training because I went through enough dog ownership, seeing that I had no idea what I was doing and sought expert advice, fell in love with the process and continued to then, develop myself into being that elite level dog trainer so that I could help other people who were in the same place.
Mm.
Same thing basically happened in my life. I struggled with a lot of the same things that most people do. Eventually got fed up with my bullshit and found somebody that had a path that I could follow that could get me to the place that I wanted to be. Once I achieved this, he really encouraged me to then go out and share my story so that I could help others do the same.
Oh, that's so powerful.
The consistency between the two is really uncanny. I mean, the basic difference between training a dog and us developing ourselves is that we question more, we can have that forward thought and sight, and we really have that reasoning ability. But so often these things actually end up working against us because we don't stick to something long enough to get the results that we're really looking for. And we keep telling ourselves that there might be an easier way, there might be a better way. Whereas when I'm training with a dog, I get to do what I know is going to be best for them, and I develop them to the point where they understand what it is that I'm looking for, and then they fall into place because that's where all the good stuff happens.
Mm. Wow, that's so good. I love actually how you say that. And why do you think that is, Stephen? Why do you think we get in our own way with more of that questioning and more of that analytical or rational mind that we apply to certain things that we do?
I mean, the bottom line is we have free will.
Yeah.
And we can see patterns in things, and we're constantly looking for the path of least resistance.
Mm.
So, difference being is that we get to opt in and out of things as we would like. And so, when you combine all of those things, so often we're going to just go with what it is that we feel comfortable with and what it is that gives us that immediate satisfaction. The problem is that usually the things that are easiest to attain are not the things that are going to do us best in the long run.
Right.
So we would rather go look for that pill or that, magical journey that's going to get us the result that we want, rather than sticking through the difficult things to develop ourselves into, the person that we really want to be.
Right. And I'm curious how much of that you think comes from society, from the message that we get from society, maybe even culture, versus how much of that actually comes from free will.
So I do think it's going to be a mixture. I mean, animals do naturally want the path of least resistance, so I think it's in us at our core anyhow. But of course, we can see in our society, our attention spans are developed to be very quick, very short, and we are taught that there is that magic pill out there. So we're always looking for it, and it's being sold to us constantly.
Mhm.
So when you do combine those two things, it makes it much easier for us to go with that option of seeking, something that can fix us very quickly, opposed to finding something that truly resolves the issue at its core and enables us to develop ourselves to be a stronger, more resilient person.
Oh, so good. Yeah, and we always talk about human behavior. What really drives our behavior is moving away from pain and then moving towards pleasure. And so here we're saying, well, there's going to be a little bit of pain associated with hard work. There's a bit of pain associated with commitment and discipline and consistency. And so, how do we wrap our brains around that to really be okay to accept hard work? And I use the word hard work, but of course, let's talk about maybe hard effort versus it actually being this thing that is overwhelming or maybe unsustainable. And so, what would you say around that, Stephen? How do we shift to that place where we're more welcoming of that effort that we're going to put in?
I mean, if we can start by understanding that all of the good things in life actually start with pain,
Mm.
that's where we get the most opportunity for growth and development. And then if we can recognize that, we can start to actually embrace it rather than fear it and try to run away from it. And then knowing that if you can stick through the difficult times, that you're going to get that good experience in the long run. I mean, understanding again that we are going to pay for it one way or another. You
Mm.
either pay up front with the difficulty in the forefront, or you're going to pay for it later. If you go ahead and restrict your diet in the present moment and develop yourself to enjoy the healthy foods and moderate what it is that you're eating, for example, you're going to get the physical results and the mental results that come along with that, which are going to be long-term benefit.
Mhm.
Alternatively, you can just go out there and eat donuts and pizza all day and you're going to enjoy it in the moment, but all of the benefit ends with the taste buds. From that point on, as soon as you swallow it, it's all downhill. And so you're going to pay for it on the back end of it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so again, coming back to sort of that psychology and just our human behavior in general, I understand maybe that what I'm doing is not serving me. So maybe that I'm over consuming processed foods and fast food. I know that this is not serving me right now. However, I still know what I'm getting versus I'm going to put in all this effort. I'm going to put in all this energy. I'm going to invest time, possibly also money into this thing that I'm working on only to wait and wait and wait until one day that long term benefit is going to finally arrive. And so, how do we discipline ourselves? Or maybe more importantly, how do we harness patience enough to be able to stay consistent and wait for that reward that only comes later?
So I think on one end, if you're able to see somebody else that's already achieved it, you can see what's going to come down the road. And this is where it's important, whether it was in my dog training or in my coaching now. I know what the result is going to be, so I can encourage you through this. And this is where sometimes having that professional assistance is very important and worthwhile. On the other end, it's doing baby steps,
Mm.
and really paying attention to the small gains that do come, because so often at the very beginning of these journeys, we will see almost immediate results. So it's being aware of them and taking for them for what they are, really understanding the wins that you achieve and valuing them, opposed to discrediting them and looking for something bigger.
Right.
So often I hear people talk about the little wins, but I remove that little part and just consider it a win. A win is a win. Take it for what it is, pat yourself on the back, and use it as fuel to reach the next stage. Too often we're looking for these monstrous rewards. Those are going to take time, but they will come, but you need to use the little ones to get there.
So good. I love that. And that's the positive feedback that I feel we're always looking for. And we're always looking at, well, I want to accomplish this in 90 days or in 6 months or even a year, but that 90-day period is also made up of one day at a time. And so what if we just focus on this one day, understanding that our 100% might be different every single day, that circumstances outside our control may also be involved at times. And so that establishing consistency, I love what you say around focusing on your wins, not small wins, on all wins, is really what continues to give us that feedback to keep showing up for ourselves in a way that is so empowered and so inspired, even because I think ultimately it has to come down to taking inspired action, not just action, but actually inspired action, because that means I'm excited about something. That means I am able to harness patience. I'm able to stay consistent when I'm super enjoying whatever it is I'm doing. And it's really lighting me up. It's really finding my purpose throughout that process. And so, if you were to agree with that, Stephen, I'm just curious as to how can we harness inspired action as we move towards our goals or that ultimate outcome that we are trying to move towards.
I definitely agree with you. And I think the biggest thing is falling in love with the process.
Mm.
We're so often focused on the end result, the destination, but it's the journey that matters most. And as you start to really love the journey, is where you start getting more of those wins on a regular basis. And you're just looking forward to what it is that you're going to do in the moment. And if we look at this as, for example, the gym, instead of looking at the gym as something that I'm going to get fit 60, 90, 120 days down the road, it's about what is it doing for me in the moment. And the fact is, if you can pay attention to it, when you go in compared to when you come out, you are going to be at a much more elevated state. And when you start simply enjoying it for that, you start to just fall in love with the process, and the results will inevitably come on their own. We need to really get away from the purpose driven in the sense that we're looking for the result, and instead be purpose driven on the moment and just loving every moment for what it is.
So good, so good. And that's really where the podcast Fall in Love with Fitness is born from. Just being in the present moment and loving it, not having
Yeah.
this constant feeling of needing to punish yourself for how you look, or never being satisfied with yourself because there's something faulty with you. There's a flaw of some sort, and that flaw will be gone, and my joy will come the moment that I achieve my goals, which is really how we actually set up our goals, whether that's around finances, profession, even around health. Once this happens, then I'll be that. Once that happens, then I'll be successful, then I'll be happy. And so, why do you think that is? Why do you think we set up goals in our society so outcome focused, and also, more importantly, reserve our joy, our happiness, our feeling of success for that particular achievement, but not allow ourselves to feel that now until we finally achieve that thing? But for now, we're going to suffer, we're going to be miserable, we're going to hate ourselves through it, we're going to feel not enough all the way through it up until we finally achieve that goal. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think we're just always coming from a lack mentality. We're coming from a fear mentality. And it is what's being promoted because it enables the consumerism. But the bottom line is that we need to love ourselves for where we are. We need to understand that the moment that we make that decision, that conscious decision to go and pursue what it is that we want in our path, we are already that new person. And when we can adopt that mentality, then the day that I decide that I want to make this change, I am already that new person. I now just have to commit to actually following through to see the result that it is that I do want to achieve in the long run. And so I think it's important to just change that narrative again and understand that we don't need these things down the road, because if you're always focused on down the road, by the time you achieve that, your new goalpost will have been moved and
Yes.
you won't be happy again. So it's about falling in love with the process again and really understanding that you are already everything that you need to be. You're worth it. You just have to make the decisions that are going to get you to a healthier, more developmental stage, and then have gratitude for every step of the way.
Oh my God. I love everything that you said. And all that I could see is like these big, big billboards as you're talking. And, whether it comes to certain pharmaceuticals, or it comes to even living in that retirement home, you always see people so happy with their dogs, and, they've got everything that they possibly need now that they finally released X number of pounds, or now that they finally got the job, or they finally bought the house. And I think that's really where it stems from oftentimes, is just how things are sold to us. And things are sold to us in this after picture where suddenly everything is perfect and life is really great and we look amazing and we've got our family and we have so much love and people are appreciating us. And I think that's important just to pinpoint in today's conversation, especially as you shared, we have to change this narrative and we have to realize that that's how we are being sold things, and that everything requires effort. And yes, it does start with pain. And even as you were saying that earlier, all I could think about is childbirth, because that always starts with pain. And then, well, there's way more pain that comes with it. I've got two girls. I'll say there's a lot of pain that is in and out. However, it's really, really important to note. And something that you also talk about often is how important it is to own responsibility, to completely take ownership of something in order for you to really shift towards what it is that you want to change. So can you expand on that? What does that mean, really, to take ownership and responsibility for anything that's currently going on in our lives?
Yeah, so that one I feel really goes back to the victimhood mentality. And so often I think that in our society we get trapped in that and we start looking to blame everybody else for everything that's happening in our life. But when we do this, we lose and give up all our power.
Hmm.
If you blame somebody else for an occurrence in your life, it means you had no direct role in that. That means you can't avoid or grow past it in any way. And instead, you're just giving up and saying, oh, it's their fault. But
Right.
when we start taking ownership for our part in it, we take our power back. And from there, we can learn to grow, get over the feelings that we have of being hard done by. And we can start to develop past those things and really take control of our lives again.
Hmm.
So the responsibility for our actions, I feel, is essential to really becoming our best version of self and to being happy with our lives, regardless of the occurrences that are happening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's almost like taking ownership or responsibility is releasing the past. Because if I'm a victim, if it's always someone else's fault, if it's always my mom's fault because that's how I was raised and it was my dad's fault because I did that and it was my teacher's fault, what I'm actually doing is I'm still living in the past. And who I am today is still that child that maybe all those things happened to, and I still continue to bring the past with me. And so how can I move forward? And I think there's this thing about acceptance that we don't oftentimes understand, and especially when it comes to maybe forgiveness, because forgiveness is another form of acceptance. And I think what we don't understand is that it is for us. Accepting current circumstances is really for us. Forgiving somebody for something that occurred in the past is also for us. It's not just for them. And so, what do you say around that? How important is acceptance, or let's say even owning the responsibility or forgiveness, so important for transformation?
I mean, 100% again. I think that so often we're addicted to the past. We live in the past constantly. I mean, if you figure that everything in social media is really a representation of the past as soon as it's posted, and this is what we're constantly living in and thriving on, I think being able to move past it and actually embrace the present moment is essential. And forgiveness, as you said, is really all for us
Mhm.
because it's once again taking our present moment back and taking all of our power back and then appreciating where we are. I mean, if you removed all those difficulties in your life, you wouldn't be the person that you are. You wouldn't have had the ability to grow. I mean, the one saying that I like so much is that with every challenge in life comes with it the equivalent amount or opportunity for growth. So, you know, the more you struggle in your life, the greater the ceiling for your development really is. And when we can embrace this, it really gives us a lot of strength and we can overcome a lot more.
So good, so good. And I don't think any of us would ever pay for a movie where there's only a hero, but there's no villain. Like, why would we go pay for that and sit through that 2 hour torture and watch this person who's got such an amazing life and they're so good looking and they're super fit and they're doing all these cool things and there's absolutely no challenge whatsoever, right? We go watch a movie because there's a big challenge, because there's a big struggle. And to your point, that's the only place and the only way that growth can actually come from. And so we have to welcome this challenge. And one thing that was super interesting, Stephen, we had a retreat in Costa Rica a couple weeks ago, and it's super interesting because you bring together a group of strangers in this environment. It is a gorgeous environment. We are in paradise. However, from the outside, you can already tell that we're kind of judging each other based on, what we're seeing. There's an Ironman, for example, person who's an endurance athlete and they've got all this amazing stories around fitness and all that. And then of course, you're looking around the room and based on what everyone is showing up with, you've already kind of made a judgment around who they are, maybe how they show up in life, and maybe even how certain things were always easy for them or natural to them. And then as you start to share and you start to open up and you start to learn about everyone's story, you realize that everyone has a story. And I don't know whose story is more powerful because we all have a story. Every single story had multiple villains. Every single story had struggles. And then there was massive overcoming challenges, obstacles, adversities. And this is what we have to remember. From the outside, it might look like everyone's got it all together. But really, once you start to learn a person's story, do you realize what they had to go through to become the person that you are actually seeing today? And so that was an incredibly humbling experience. And what are your thoughts around that essentially? And I know you also have your stories and you also work with men and help them to really shift from going from being that adult boy into transitioning into more of a man. So what are you thinking around that? If you have anything to add around just that immediate almost perspective or level of judgment that we have around other people, and how oftentimes it's actually quite skewed.
So, I mean, judge a book by its cover is a saying for a reason. It comes very natural to us. It's a way for us to really protect ourselves in the sense that we can judge people just from their visual appearance. Now, the reality is that so often it's misguided. And as you mentioned, nobody really goes through life with it being completely easy.
Mhm.
That's not a realistic thing. Regardless of one person's struggle versus another's, everything that happens to us on an individual level is taken internally as being just as severe as whatever anybody else's struggle is. And so learning to appreciate people for what they have gone through, I think is necessary.
Mhm.
And on the flip side of that, I think this is also why it's so crucial that people share their stories more. You know, most people are simply unwilling to be vulnerable. They're so guarded that they don't want to be judged by others, but everybody is going through life, and we typically struggle with very similar things. The representation of those things might come out differently, but they're very consistent battles that we go through in our human experience. So by sharing these stories, it enables other people to see that they're not alone, that there are other people going through similar things to them, and that by sharing their story, they can actually encourage somebody else to overcome something they're battling with.
Right.
And yes, as you touched on, a big focus of what I do with my coaching is helping to develop grown boys into men. And this is something that I had to take responsibility for myself, seeing that, you know, I may have been a 40-year-old man from an external point of view, but internally I was still underdeveloped and immature and really walking around as a grown child.
Mm.
And, you know, throughout my life, I had gone through stages of development. So it's not like I was a giant 3-year-old, but I was still bringing out immature viewpoints of what a man was and representing them in society. And
Mm.
so I think if we can understand what a healthy, balanced male is, we can encourage younger children and grown men to really stand up, take accountability, and develop themselves into what they should have been or could be.
Super interesting. And this is actually very fascinating to me. And so maybe we can just rewind a moment and then talk about what does it actually mean to be a grown adult boy versus being a man? What does that mean to you?
So number one, I mean, always pointing the finger outside of, you know, the situation. So not taking responsibility for my actions in their fullness. Um, Another one being that instead of putting my 100% into everything, which is something that you sort of touched on, is that I would be going through the actions so that I could say I was doing what I was doing, but I wasn't putting in the effort. I wasn't putting the energy in behind it. I was simply doing what I knew I had to do so that I could say I was doing it. But if I got called out on it, I could defend it. But
Um,
if I really looked internally, I knew I was just going through the motions. And then if I wasn't successful, I could complain about it because, well, I did it. But if I was really honest with myself, I knew that I didn't do it the way I should have. I wasn't showing up with my 100% and really trying to achieve my best, which often comes down to feeling like you're not worthwhile and giving yourself an excuse that, well, if I fail, I didn't put in my 100%, I could have done better. But in turn, you're just walking through life continuously failing because you're not putting in your 100% and you're looking to blame somebody else for it. And then if you see somebody else who has put in their 100%, we judge them for it internally.
right. Wow. Okay. So powerful. And so, at what point in your life did you have awareness around this, that this is actually something that maybe you called yourself out on?
So there were a few stages. Around when I was 27 and I was involved in my dog training and breeding, that gave me a responsibility that I couldn't simply half-ass. I
Mhm.
had to show up because I had X number of dogs in my care, and I knew that they were constantly learning. So one of us was winning at all times. And if I was showing up with my 70%, that means that they're taking advantage of me for the other 30%. So that did help me develop along that path. But it really wasn't until I got into my coaching in my, 40, as I was turning 40, that I recognized the final challenges that I had to overcome, and that I really stepped up, got rid of the vices that were holding me back, addressed them for what they were, and started to really analyze my life and see where it was that I was just making excuses and where it was that I needed to level up.
Okay. So it sounds like a lot of this is really maturing into taking on the full responsibility of certain things going on in your life versus just kind of, I don't like the word mediocre, but maybe just going through the motions of whatever life is, whatever maybe people told you, and whatever you probably think is the right thing to do to please others, and maybe even to not fully own something or be responsible for a negative outcome. And so if we were to say, okay, this is what it would be like to, let's say, transition into more of showing up as the man version of the adult versus the boy version, what does that look like? What are we actually aiming to achieve?
I think in part you just touched on it. Instead of looking to fit in, we're looking to be ourselves.
Mm.
We're looking to develop to be our best selves, regardless of how that's going to impact the people around us. And often, one thing that I noticed was that I was lowering myself in various ways in order to fit in rather than being my best self out of fear of being rejected.
Mhm.
And so I think when we choose to be our true deep version of ourselves, we're fearful of rejection. And whether it's a man or a woman, the same basic essence is there in that we crave being accepted by our community. And we're fearful that if we are vulnerable and we do step outside the comfort zones, that we're going to lose the people in our lives.
Mm.
And in turn, if we can actually own ourselves for what it is and become our best selves, we're going to find the inner fulfillment that's going to make us truly happy, opposed to looking outside of ourselves and often filling that void with things that society and our community is approving.
Right.
And so it's really just about finding yourself and finding your best version of self so that you are truly fulfilled in your life.
That's so good. That's so good. And that just brings me back to our earlier conversation around acceptance. And for me, one of the things that I also coach and teach is we have to accept obviously life as it is, but then we also have to accept that as we do step into that true self and to who we really are and really get aligned with our purpose, our mission, and maybe just even our beingness here, that we have to realize that not everyone's going to like it, and it's not going to be everyone's jam, and there's going to be a lot of people that maybe you might fall out or you may lose out of your life. And so what have you seen around that, Stephen, as you've started to shift into becoming more of who you know you're meant to be? How has that impacted maybe your relationships and maybe even your current environment?
It tends to have a major impact. I mean, so the bottom line is, I don't think you don't ever fully see who is in your circle, your true circle, until you become your true self. And at that point is where you start to see the people that truly want to see the best for you, and those that have been sort of just tagging along for whichever reason that now feel threatened by the situation. They may not feel comfortable about you wanting to be your best self. They start to view you as egotistical, or, they start to basically look at you as, why is it that you're worth so much more than I am?
Mhm.
And the bottom line is that of course that is a very flawed mentality because we're all worth that. And it's just that some people are fearful of that and don't feel that they're worth it. So instead of trying to attach to the new narrative that you're running with, they just mock or put up walls or just step out of your circle altogether. And of course, the bottom line is that if you can lose somebody from you being your best version of self and wanting the best for yourself, they really shouldn't be in your circle in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So well said. And it's interesting because it sounds like you're losing a lot by becoming yourself, but actually I find it to be so freeing. And then to your point, people's true colors, or maybe even the reason why they're actually in your life, starts to appear and starts to make more sense. And this was something I feel that I was actually tethered to for a really long time, and especially around my level of work and the things that I do. And I've always been referred to as obsessed. And now I take that as such a compliment, because I am actually very obsessed with what I do. And I feel so grateful that I've found my passion. And for me, it's effortless effort. I really show up, and I could work 7 days a week. You give me a laptop, and believe me, I don't stop. And so that's good, and obviously has its own limitations in many ways. But I remember one of the things that I was really nervous around moving towards was actually releasing maybe a lot of the conversations or the social environments, and a lot of my peers, essentially, because I was going to start to maybe start to be looking like I was so full of myself, like you're saying, or so egotistical or so obsessed. And so I've actually found it to be incredibly liberating. And I'm curious, with you, have you experienced something similar as you started to really get into also the work that you do? Because I can tell you're very passionate about what you do. I can tell you really care so much for the people that you support and coach. And so what was your experience around that as you stepped into that highest version of yourself?
Yeah, I had situations where when I was first really presenting myself in this new light, I had people reaching out to see if I was okay. I had people reaching out to my partner asking if I was okay mentally, like if I was having struggles. And the irony to this is that I was presenting hyper positive developmental viewpoints. And, these people were thinking that there was something inherently wrong with me by me doing this. And of course, this is just reflective of their inner viewpoint and where they are in life. But on my end, as I worked through the initial feelings of this, because it's a struggle, anytime that you're doing something new, it's fragile.
Mhm.
And you already have insecurities built into you from your lifelong development, that it can be hard to get past some of these, especially when they are coming from loved ones and people that you've held dear in your life. Now, as I've moved forward, I've really seen that as a whole, I've been lucky that I was surrounded by a very solid group of people to begin with. And that's not to say everybody, but I've still maintained a lot of support from a lot of my close friends. And that, of course, helps. But regardless of that, I've seen that as I move forward, the reward that comes back far exceeds any mocking or any of these negatives that I've, been exposed to during my journey. Uh, um, and as you start to see the light that you bring to the world, I mean, all of the other stuff sort of fades in its validity. I don't hold that close to my heart, whereas the messages that I receive from people on a daily basis expressing what I've helped them overcome, it's just inexplicable how that makes you feel, and so as we develop ourselves and we see how good we feel in that regard, we start sharing it and we see what it does for others. That feels even better. And so between the two of developing ourselves to be our best selves and then being of service to others and the reward that comes back from that, I mean, everything else just sort of fades out and it becomes background noise. And at the same time, I still have this hope that all those people that take it in a negative perspective, I'm still planting seeds in their brain. And
Right.
one day, whether it's in my, peripheral or not, hopefully those things grow and it does bring value to their life too.
So good, so good. And the greatest way to influence anyone is through your actions oftentimes, and not just what you're saying, and not just through your words and all that. And so if I were to ask you then, Stephen, for, let's say, when it comes to that person who right now, as we're approaching 2024, we're recording right now before 2024, but it is the new year, for that person who wants to get more regimented around training, maybe around a strength training routine or a gym ritual, and they've always had these limiting beliefs that it's hard, that you have to be in there for hours, that progress is so slow, that it's so boring, and that's super boring to be indoors and all of that stuff. What would you say to that person to help them maybe shift the narrative, or even shift their mindset around more pleasure and less pain?
Oh, there's so much to touch on that one. But I mean, ultimately, it is about starting small, finding the gratitude in everything and appreciating everything for what it is. You know, if you can really fall in love with whichever exercise program it is that you're doing, it doesn't matter what it is, it's just about being active. And the more active you are, the more you're going to raise your energy levels, you're going to feel better because of it, and it will encourage you to continue on that path. And so I think by not setting the standard too high, especially at the beginning, especially if you have been struggling with it, but instead focusing on the consistency of doing something good.
Mhm.
You know, too often we're consistent in the worst things possible, but we struggle to do the consistent good things in our lives. And so it doesn't matter what you're doing. It could be going for a 5-minute walk every day, but start small, be consistent over anything, hold yourself to your word, and find the value in the path instead of always just being focused on that end goal.
So good. I love that. I love that so much. I love everything that you've said, and I love your energy so, so much, Stephen. And so, as we conclude our conversation today, if there was that one last thing that you wanted to share that you didn't have a chance to just yet, what could that be?
I mean, really, it's just about being, it goes back to the gratitude. It is all about gratitude because I feel that everything is the mindset. And if we're grateful for everything in our life, then we can find the appreciation for everything that happens in our life. And as you start to focus on that, the mindset starts helping you and propelling you forward. So it's really just making those baby steps and changing the narrative to everything is not happening to you, it's happening for you, and it's giving you an opportunity for growth constantly. So enjoy your life because it's so short. It goes so quickly and it's so beautiful. You know, it is constantly surrounding us with beauty. You just have to appreciate when it's there.
Oh my goodness, so good. What a beautiful way to end. And just on that note, for me, gratitude is reminding myself of what's here already, what I already have versus what I still am lacking, what I still want, what is still not available for me right now. And the moment I shift into that energy, it is insane what comes up for me. It is insane to just realize the amount of gifts I have and the amount of love and generosity and abundance that is already there at all times if we choose to actually search for it. So, with that, I love this conversation so much, Stephen. And if somebody wanted to reach out to you, to connect with you, where could they go to do that?
Instagram's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. My Brother's Keeper Coaching is my tag. If you're not on social media, then I do have a website as well, which is www.mybrotherskeepercoaching.com.
Amazing. We'll definitely add that to the show notes. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much for having me.